Ruth 3:1-6. One day, Naomi said to Ruth, "My daughter, it's time that I found a permanent home for you so that you will be provided for. Boaz is a close relative of ours. He's been very kind by letting you gather grain with your young women. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley at the threshing floor. Now do as I tell you. Take a bath, put on perfume, and dress in your nicest clothes. Then go to the threshing floor. But don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down there, and he will tell you what to do." "I will do everything you say," Ruth replied. So she went down to the threshing floor that night and followed all the instructions of her mother-in-law.
His name was Jim, and he was unlike any person I'd met up until that time. I was a pastor at a small town in Ohio, and Jim was someone who bought a lot of land from the coal company. It was land that had already been strip mined, and after a coal company buys the mineral rights off a piece of land or buys the land and strips it, it just leaves it there, and it has to put some topsoil back on it that's mandated by the government, and then they just leave it. And the land's not really good for much at all. But Jim saw something else, and Jim had some money. He was originally from New Jersey, moved out to Ohio, and bought almost 1,000 acres of stripped land that no one really wanted. But Jim was someone who was extraordinary. His dream was to build from scratch a Christian camp and retreat center. And so he bought all this land, and somehow, and we really don't know how it happened, he was able to get from the coal company the mineral rights from the land. Usually they retain those rights because if something happens, they want to be able to come back and get more coal. But Jim negotiated this. They wanted to get the land off their books, and Jim was just a great wheeler dealer. And so he bought land. And so we started this camp, and he asked me to be on the board of directors for this camp. And so I was glad to do that, and we'd sit in meetings. We had no money at all, so we would have short meetings. Jim would say, we need a new tractor to keep the grass mowed, and we look at the budget. Is there any money? No. All in favor? No one, because we have no money. And that was pretty much the meeting. We just had some brownies and went home. That's all there was to it. Then, all of a sudden, the fracking technology hit the valley where we were. And overnight, Jim's 900 acres with the mineral rights became a literal gold mine. We were getting checks of $400,000, $700,000, $300,000. And so we started having long meetings because it takes a long time to figure out how to spend all that money. And there were gaps in the liquid, in the money that came. We would spend money, we'd build things, build infrastructure, and then we would have no money. And we had to wait until another lease came, or a well was dug, or some oil and gas was harvested. So in that time, we had to have money to keep us going. And we'd come to these meetings with no money after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and having all this infrastructure. And Jim would say, I found a way to make some money. And we said, what? And one time he came in and said, I'm selling dirt. And we said, you're selling what? He said, I'm selling dirt. What dirt? He said, dirt on the land. I'm just selling it. Do people want to buy dirt? Oh, you betcha they want to buy dirt. Jim made $200,000 selling dirt. It wasn't extraordinary dirt. It was just normal dirt. And he was selling. Then he came one time and said, hey, I found a way to make more money. How are you going to do it, Jim? I'm going to start a fish farm. What? A fish farm. I'm going to dig 12 ponds, put different fish in them. And I'm going to start selling it to McDonald's for their filet of fish. And we're like, okay, well, that idea went nowhere. I mean, it just cost us money like crazy. He came back one time and said, I'm selling water out of many of our lakes. And we said, what? He goes, yeah, I'm selling. And he made a ton of money out of water. Well, finally, wells were sunk in our land. And when wells are sunk through fracking and oil and gas is harvested, everybody gets rich quick. And I remember one meeting, Jim came in and he had an idea for how we should spend this money. And on the board with me was a couple of businessmen who weren't as awed at Jim as I was, and some other people, about 5 of us on the board. And I remember one time Jim coming up with some idea, I forgot what it was. I think zip lines were involved and playgrounds were involved and stuff like that. And we're like, okay. And then mobile home sites, or not mobile home sites, but RV sites and all this stuff. And Jim's been thinking about it. And I remember one time we were wrestling with the ideas, and these guys were shooting Jim's ideas down, and it came down to my vote. And I looked at Jim, and I said, Jim, I've been here 5 or 6 years, and I've seen you make money selling dirt. So I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. It's a British phrase. Penny is the penny, pound is the British dollar. And basically the sentiment is, I'm dedicated. I'm going to be in for a little bit, which means I'm going to be in all the way. I'm not going to dance around the shallow end of the pool. I'm diving headfirst into the deep end with you, Jim. And I remember saying that several times to Jim, because Jim had a gift, and it was just to make money out of absolutely nothing. Where people saw nothing, Jim saw dollars. And he was able to do some extraordinary things in that ministry. And the ministry's still going strong, and he's moved on to other things. He now lives down here on the Keys in Florida, and he's selling boat rides. He bought a boat and off Marathon Key, and he's got a house there that was ravaged by a hurricane. He rebuilt the sucker. He's charging people an exorbitant amount of money to come down and ride in a boat and stay in a hotel. He's making money doing hardly anything at all right now, because all his ideas are working. And I was smart, I think, to be in for a penny or in for a pound. Go all the way with Jim. I never stopped any of his ideas if I could help it. I became dedicated to Jim's ideas because I saw his abilities. They were proven to me over and over again. Being in for a penny and in for a pound also means we have to trust God if we're going to follow him. He's going to ask us to do things that may not seem natural to us or even desirable by us. But if we're going to follow him, we have to be in it all the way. Naomi tells Ruth, you need to get married again. My son died, you're a widow, you're a Moabite, you're not even a Jew. But Boaz has been nice to you, and Boaz is sweet on you. Take my word for it. And I need you to get sweet smelling, take a bath, and wear your best robe, and hide down there on the threshing floor. When you see him after he's celebrating, go over to him. Don't say a word. Just uncover his feet and then lay down at his feet. Folks, that was just as weird then as it sounds like now. Ruth wouldn't say, oh yeah, people do that. No, you don't. What? No, it's not how you approach anybody. But Naomi said, I got an idea, and I think it may work. And Ruth says, okay. And she does it. Why did Naomi think that way? But more importantly, why did Ruth respond the way she responded? When you and I are going to follow God, we have to realize that he's in control. And when he says do something, we have to say, this makes no sense to me, but I will follow. I will follow you. Here's the idea. Naomi had a problem. God had a solution in the man Boaz. And so here's the problem Naomi has. Here's a solution that Boaz has to that problem. What's missing? The connection between her problem and God's answer. And that person is Ruth. And Ruth is the intermediate step you and I have to take. We have a problem. I don't know what your problems are this morning. I'm guaranteeing you, most of us walked in here with some. Most of you have a prayer request right now that's burning up your heart and your mind and your thoughts. It's hard for you to concentrate on anything else because it's just there. And that's a problem and it's a need. And you've come because you know God has the answer. It's that intermediate step. How do we connect our problem to God's answer? And that is answered for us in the actions of Ruth this morning. When we look at this, we see that Ruth had to do something. But first of all, let's look at the problem. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to Ruth, should I not try to find a home for you where you'll be provided for? Naomi was getting older, was going to die. Ruth was younger, was not going to die anytime soon, according to the actuarial tables in those days. And she was still of marrying age, still a young woman. And so she knew that if she was going to marry Ruth off and give her a future, it had to be now. This is when Ruth was desirable by men, and this is when she needed to find somebody. And Boaz had been nothing but kind to her in the months of the harvest. Probably since April, it's probably now late July. And she's looking and thinking, well, Ruth, he's shown interest. We need to strike while the iron is hot. You know, to admit the need is to admit that we cannot solve the problem ourselves. Naomi couldn't solve the problem herself. First of all, she needed a suitor for Ruth, and that was taken care of by God in the man Boaz. But also, that wasn't enough. She needed Ruth to show some initiative. And sometimes our needs will require the cooperation of others. And so we say, God, how's this going to work? I can't control somebody. But God certainly can. If God has a plan, which he does, you need to know that God will do all the work that needs to be done to make that plan happen. And as a follower of Jesus, we have to develop the habit of taking our need directly to him. Notice what Naomi does. Here's the problem. There's the solution in the man Boaz. What does Naomi do? She takes the problem and she brings it to the solution. She takes Ruth's singleness, and she takes it to Boaz, directly to him. She doesn't call somebody else and say, hey, can you tell Boaz that Ruth likes him? Could you leave him a note in social studies and say, Ruth likes you? Maybe he'll find it in his book when he does his homework. Could you do that? Remember those things in middle school? I think this girl likes you. I never got a note like that, but I heard some people did. But that was what Naomi said. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go directly to Boaz. We're going to go take this to Boaz right now. We have to have the habit of thinking and realizing and agreeing that God can solve the problem. You know, back in 1957, they did a survey and they found out that 82% of Americans said that religion could answer almost or most all of the day's problems that they have. The day-to-day problems, they knew that God could solve them. That was 82% in 1957, down to 66% in 2002. Recently, it went dipped below 50%. 1/3 of Americans today say religion is largely old-fashioned and out of date. That was 7% in 57. It's over 35% now. This survey was done 3 years ago. It's probably, I'm thinking, probably worse than that. Many Americans have no opinion on religion and don't have any religion to speak of. That is what we need to understand. We need to take our problems directly to God. Why? Because God has the solution to our problems. The solution to everything you're worried about this morning, God knows. And God has. I'm not filling your head with wishful thinking. This is the truth. God has a solution. Boaz was the answer to Naomi's prayer. He was there. He was available. He had the solution. Why does Naomi see Boaz as the one who holds the answer to the problem? Well, why do we come to God seeking his answer to our problems? Why do we do that? Why do we come to God? Why? It's in the text, really. Naomi says, is not Boaz, with whom servant girls you've been working with, a kinsman of ours? Aren't we related to him? Why do we come to God seeking his answer to our problems? Why is that? Why do we come to God seeking his answer to our problems? We could have somebody else answer them, but why do we go to God and ask him to do it? Why do we come and ask God to do that? You know, we find trouble when we seek our own way to answer our own problems. I read this recently, a fellow in Seattle. This showed up in the New York Times, of all papers, back in 2017. A man in Seattle who was deathly afraid of spiders walked into his laundry room attached to his kitchen and saw a big spider. And so he decided to handle the problem himself. So he got an aerosol spray can and a cigarette lighter. And he made his own blowtorch. The fire alarms went off as far as 8 miles away. And after $40,000 of damage to the structure, $20,000 to the contents, and a lot of firemen laughing really at the whole spectacle, no one ever found out if the spider made it out or not. His answer to solving his problem was to burn part of his house down, and we don't even know if it really solved the problem. The spider might have been, so it's getting hot in here, I think I'll leave now. Folks, when we try to solve our own problems, we make a mess of things. You know that. I know that. We've seen that over and over in our own lives. Why did Naomi trust Boaz, though? Boaz had previously shown his love with his actions. Our Father in heaven sacrificed Jesus to grant us access to himself. Do you now think, or should we now believe, that one of our problems is outside of his provision? That one of our problems he's not going to be able to solve. One of our problems he has no interest in at all. He sent Jesus to die for you and me, to solve our greatest need. Your greatest need was the sin debt that you owe, that I owe. The sin debt we're born with, under the sword, ready to execute us for sin in our lives. And Jesus has taken that threat away by incurring that wrath and that punishment himself. If you have yet, on this day right now, while you're listening to my voice, said to God, I am a sinner. Your standard is perfection, and I'm far from it, and I have no hope of ever getting to you if I have to be perfect. I am helpless. It is hopeless. Can you do something? And he says, yes, I sent Jesus to put his perfection on you. You can have it right now if you admit your need and ask for it. That simple transaction changes your life forever. If you've never said that to God, you can do that right now while I'm talking to you. If you have questions about that, and you probably do, I would love to answer those. There's people sitting around you that could provide the answers. But if you'd like to talk to me, I would love to do that. If you have time this week, please let me know. You can do that by using this card. Down near the bottom of the front says, I'd like to know more about becoming a follower of Jesus. If you check that one checkbox, give me a way to contact you, you will hear from me. And we will talk about the most important decision you can make. A decision based on the love of God sacrificing his son for you. Naomi says to Ruth, Boaz is part of our family. When you and I have a problem, we go to our Father in heaven. Why? Because we are in his family once we confess our sin and ask Jesus to bring us into God's family. And so we trust him because his love, we trust him because we are in his family. We're in the family of God, and we have the privilege of asking for his help. We're in the family of God, and we're given a privilege of asking for his help. We benefit from being part of the family. We're welcomed into his presence. God makes himself available to us as Boaz was made available to Ruth. Our God makes himself available to us at all times to receive and to listen to us. God's not too busy for your issue. God's not too far to not hear your voice. We have a need. God has the solution. But we must respond. We have to respond to that. We just can't say, well, I guess God's going to do it. No, there's probably something God's asking you to do. Notice what Naomi says. Find out where he's lying down. Be quiet. Be stealthy. Find out where he's lying. Then go and quietly uncover his feet and lie down at his feet. And then he'll wake up and tell you what to do. And Ruth says, okay, I'll do it. Why? Well, Ruth knew the love of her mother-in-law. She also knew the love of Boaz, and she had learned to trust. Ruth responded by listening and obeying, and our dedication to Jesus should mirror hers to Naomi and even to Boaz. We are given the responsibility, you and I, to apply the solution to the problem. Many times God's going to ask us to take a step of faith. It's going to be a little scary sometimes, but that's what he does. He asks us to trust him. In many instances, God's solution will require our humility and our vulnerability. In some instances, he's going to ask you to do things that you're going to think, I'm not sure I can do them. In many instances, God's solution will require our humility and our vulnerability. Notice what she asked Ruth to do. Go to a place no woman is supposed to go. And then go and uncover his feet and lie down at his feet. Folks, I know the times were different, but women were still women back then. And I can't imagine how gleeful a woman would be to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to a guy tonight when you sleep, and I'm going to uncover his feet, and I'm going to lay down at his feet. Okay. All right. Well, have a good time. Enjoy yourself. Of course not. Don't you think she's thinking, what if he wakes up? What if somebody sees me? What if he doesn't really like me that way? I mean, he may like me, but he doesn't like me. I don't know. What I don't understand. Okay, all right, Mom, I'll do it. Okay. We must risk possible awkwardness and embarrassment even. Sometimes God's going to ask us to do things that don't make a whole lot of sense to us. It may cause us some exposure we don't want to expose. But if we know we're following God, we can trust that he will work things out. John Wesley wrote about dedication of a follower of Jesus and how a follower of Jesus should possess this type of dedication. Here's what he wrote. He said, I'm no longer my own, but thine. Put me to what thou wilt. Rank me with whom thou wilt. Put me to doing. Put me to suffering. Let me be employed for thee or laid aside for thee. Exalted for thee or brought low for thee. Let me be full. Let me be empty. Let me have all things. Let me have nothing. I freely and heartily yield all things to thy pleasure and disposal. Folks, that's the dedication that we are to have to God our Father through Jesus. Why wouldn't we, when we realize who Jesus is and what he did for you and me? He went to a cross. He was vulnerable. He was humble. He was embarrassed. It cost him everything. Being executed on a cross in Rome was not something pleasant for anybody to have done, of course, but even to witness. It was not a sterile situation. There was no dignity in it. You were stripped of everything. Everything was taken from you. But that is what we give to God. We don't worry about anything other than committing. And we must commit to be in for a penny or in for a pound. Whatever the cost, we will do just that. Suppose you gave a friend a book. It's a highly prized book. Maybe it was a first edition of some rare literature and worth tons of money. And as you're going through your home, later you realize there's a page that came out of that book. And without the page, that book would be worthless. And you thought, maybe I could just ask him for the book back and put the page in and be rich. But no, if you've given the book away, you don't even think about that, do you? You give them the page because you've already given them the book. You gave them the book in for a penny. You found the page that was going to make that book priceless in for a pound. Your decision is natural. Your decision is automatic because they own the book now because you gave it to them. You don't go back on your decision. You don't wane in your dedication. Our dedication to the Lord is a continuous act, an ongoing surrender to his power and to his love. Take this with you this morning. Every person's first need is for a permanent and restful home. God has provided that through Christ. Seasons of our lives may seem dark, but God is aware he has the ability to meet our needs, and he will. And the Lord desires to meet with us far more than we do. Has that truth come bounding into your mind and heart lately? That God wants to meet with you more than you want to meet with him? He is ready to meet with you at any moment and will listen for as long as you'd like to talk to him. Why? Because he's a pushover? Because he's easy? No, because he's showing you the depth of his love. You and I need to remember that it's not the gifts that we seek, it's the giver. We come to seek the giver. It's not the gifts that we seek, but the giver that we seek. We want to know him more. We want to witness him more. We want to love him more. It's not the gifts that we seek, but the giver. A man tells that early in his marriage, he was trying to find the perfect wedding anniversary gift for his wife. She grew up on a farm, and we know that he knew that she liked weather things because the weather was front and center on a farm. You kind of live or die by the weather. And so he bought her a rain gauge, and she looked at him like he was insane when he gave it to her. It was such a ridiculous gift. She goes, "What am I going to do with this?" He goes, "Well, you can measure the rain." And they lived in the suburbs, and her reaction to him was what our reaction would be, is what? Why? Why am I measuring rain? Well, you were a farmer. Not anymore. I live in the suburbs. Why do I want a rain gauge? Years later, at every anniversary, even the kids mocked the father for the weird gift of, "Hey, Dad, did you get her a rain gauge this year?" He said, no, of course not. What was he trying to express? You know, the gift was terrible, but he wanted his wife to understand the heart of himself, the giver. And in time, she realized that the giver was what she wanted, not the gifts he could give. Have you realized that about your Father in heaven? That he's more precious himself than anything he can do for you. But he does something for us. The greatest, most wonderful thing anybody could ever do. As we celebrate communion this morning, let me ask you to think about this morning. Do you know for sure that you're a hopeless, helpless sinner? Are you agreed with that idea? Is that truth burning in your heart and mind, that you have no hope to get to God? The only way you can get to him is by him gifting you with Jesus. With the blood of Jesus that poured out on the cross, he applies it to you, and that makes you perfect, and you can come into his presence. Does that give you a celebratory heart this morning? If so, you are invited to celebrate that this morning. Communion doesn't gain you anything. It is a representation of something that has already happened. I'm going to ask our ushers to come forward as I pray now, and you prepare your hearts as we prepare to celebrate the greatest, most wonderful gift God has ever granted us. Father in heaven, we thank you for Jesus' sacrifice. You met our needs. We had a problem. You were the solution, and we saw that, Father, just as Ruth saw that, as Naomi saw that with Boaz. You were the solution to the problem. Would you come now, and would you give us hearts full of celebration, recognizing that when we have admitted our guilt and confessed our sin and asked Jesus to be our only hope, that gives us personhood in the family of God. We are your children, you are our Father, and we are safe here and forever with you. Thank you for meeting our needs, the ones we don't even know we have yet, and the ones that are front and center in our minds and hearts. As we celebrate now, let us remember the greatest need has already been met, and any other need that comes after that is secondary, and we can have peace knowing that you will provide. In Jesus' name, amen.